One of my favorite guilty pleasures is Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. But not just any Reese's. I am particularly fond of the holiday versions that they have started putting out recently. You know, you've got the pumpkin-shaped one for Halloween, the tree-shaped one for Christmas, there's a heart for Valentine's Day, but the best of them all, the OG, the original, the point of comparison for all others is the Reese's Easter egg. It is my absolute favorite. And you want to talk about Christmas decorations showing up in stores earlier and earlier each year. I was walking around the grocery store in February when I saw the first Easter display. I thought to myself, this is absolutely ridiculous. It's not even Ash Wednesday yet. And then I proceeded to put 4 packages into my cart. Now, I will admit, last year it got a little bit out of hand. I had a little bit of a hoarding problem when it came to those delicious treats. But it was because of a very good reason, because of something that had happened, a very traumatic experience the year before. Alyssa and I were going grocery shopping. It couldn't have been more than a few days before Easter, and I was planning on stocking up for my post-Holy Week recovery period. But Alyssa, however, wisely suggested, if you just wait until after Easter, they'll go on sale, and then you can save a whole bunch of money. But come Monday, when I went to the store, the unthinkable happened. Every single Reese's Easter egg was gone. I must have stopped at 3 different Vons stores that day, and all of them were barren and devoid of happiness and joy. So last year, I didn't wait. I bought early and I bought often. But because I was so afraid of the possibility of running out, I ended up not actually eating all that many of them. And now I am still finding rock-hard, expired chocolate eggs in the back of my pantry. Have any of you ever had that problem? Maybe not with Reese's eggs. For those video game lovers out there, how many times have you gotten to the end of a game with an inventory full of an especially rare item that you were too afraid to use, that you thought you might need for later, but later never actually came? Or maybe it's a special bottle of wine that you are saving for just the right occasion. Maybe it's not even a specific item. Maybe it's more of an activity or an event, waiting to go to that special restaurant or to go on that trip that you've always dreamed of, or to tell that person how you really feel, or to start your own business. But whenever we ask the question, when, the answer is someday. Well, in today's gospel, Mary teaches us the importance of making the most of today. This scene is packed with all kinds of implied meaning and subtext, enough to fill dozens of sermons. But don't worry, I just plan on preaching the one. Jesus has gathered with his disciples in the home of Lazarus, Mary, and Martha. Lazarus is freshly raised from the dead and has hopefully had time for a bath or 3. And it was 6 days before Passover, 6 days before the events that happened in that upper room that we will hear about on Maundy Thursday. And just like that night, Jesus and his followers had gathered for dinner, when suddenly Mary brings out a pound of costly perfume made of pure nard. She takes the perfume, anoints Jesus' feet with it, and wipes up the excess with her hair. She adopts this posture of a servant. She provides a foretaste, a foreshadowing of what Jesus will do when he washes the feet of his disciples. She performs the same act of loving service that Jesus calls all of us to engage in. And what's also incredibly important here is the verb that is used. She anoints him, reminding us all of the true meaning of that word Messiah, the anointed one. Mary fulfills this centuries-old prophecy with a bold and generous act of hospitality. Now, additionally, what is translated here as nard has been translated by others as frankincense. Yes, that frankincense, the same stuff that was given to Jesus by one of the three magi, the same substance that is used to anoint the bodies of the dead. Now, this act by Mary clearly alludes to Jesus' ever-nearing death on the cross, but it's also a little confusing. Why here? Why now? I mean, clearly that amount of perfume isn't cheap or easy to come by. Judas makes everyone well aware of that fact with his self-serving opposition to her actions. And one would think that if she was going to use it on anyone, it would have been on her brother, Lazarus. You remember, she had no idea that Jesus was going to raise him from the dead. But she didn't use it on Lazarus, which means she must have been saving it for someone truly special. Had she been able to understand what all of the disciples had seemed to miss, that the Messiah must die before rising again on the third day? Did she know what was about to happen? And if so, why use it now? All she had to do was wait just a few more days, and her act would have been entirely appropriate and properly timed. But no, she chose this moment to make an extravagant gesture of love, an outpouring of abundance, a celebration of life in the face of impending death. Mary shows us what living out a theology of abundance looks like. Abundance as opposed to scarcity. Scarcity tells us that there isn't enough, that supplies are short, so you need to get yours and hang onto it because you better believe that someone else is going to try and take it. Scarcity tells us that we should trust only ourselves, look out for only ourselves. Scarcity makes us look at a loving and wonderful act of service and question the motives, question the necessity, just as Judas did. But abundance tells us that God blesses with wild and reckless abandon. Abundance tells us that we should trust in God to provide. Abundance reminds us that all we have is by the grace of God, and that there is nowhere that we can store away our treasures that protects them from moth or rust. Mary doesn't do what she did because she hates the poor, as Judas tries to imply. Nor is this a reckless waste of money. I would argue that no outpouring of love is ever wasted. Rather, this is her way of recognizing the ways that God, specifically Jesus, had blessed her life. She understood that if we're not careful, that waiting for the opportune moment turns into hoarding, turns into waste, and that is not how God intended for us to use the blessings that we have been given. We were meant to enjoy them, meant to utilize them, meant to bless others with them. This was not a wanton waste on her part. It was a celebratory act of worship. I recently read an article that was written by a woman named Debbie Thomas, who works as the minister of lifelong formation at an Episcopalian church up in the Bay Area. The article was entitled, "More Than Pain." Thomas began the article by quoting one of my favorite movies, The Princess Bride. Always hooked when Princess Bride is at the start. She refers to the scene, and I'm sorry, spoilers, but it's also like 30 years old, so. She refers to the scene where Buttercup thinks, where Wesley is disguised as the dread pirate Roberts and is telling Princess Buttercup about her true love's captivity aboard his ship. Now remember, at this point in the movie, Buttercup thinks that Roberts has killed her true love, Wesley. She doesn't realize that he actually is Wesley. She rebukes him for mocking her pain, to which Wesley replies, "Life is pain. Anyone who says differently is selling something." Now, while his words are a little harsh, I think that anyone who has spent an adequate amount of time here on earth knows them to be true, at least to one degree or another. Bad things happen to good people. There is suffering and pain, heartache and torment. We face hardships and struggles, and just when we think that we have made it through to the other side, we're taken out at the knees again by something that comes out of left field. And personally, I think that one of the great strengths of this faith that we share, particularly our Lutheran variety of it, is the honesty with which we look at that reality of life. And it doesn't stop with honest observation. We respond to the brokenness of the world as well. We make the bold proclamation that God walks with us in all that we endure, that God knows what it means to suffer, to face rejection, to experience pain and heartache and loss. We have a faith that speaks to, can live in those broken, lonely, and difficult places. To quote the article, we worship a God of sorrows who is well acquainted with grief. But what about the flip side of all of that? We certainly have a faith that speaks well to the dark nights of the soul, but does it have something to say about joy and abundance and life as well? I certainly think so. It would appear that both Mary and Jesus in the story for today think so as well. Thomas, in her article, says, "Maybe in these days of pandemic and pain, we need a more robust theology of holy delight, one that honors the whole of our experience as humans, a theology that says Christianity acknowledges the reality of pain and death, but it is not about pain and death. It's about joy and life. It's about a God who died so that we can live. It's about a kingdom that enacts justice, equity, and healing so that all of creation can revel in abundant life." Now, I know that talking about joy and abundance and holy delight are odd topics this far into Lent, this close to the Passion narrative that's just around the corner, but hey, I don't pick these readings. I think that this is a good reminder that even though we have a faith that courageously and honestly looks at the evils of this world, at the pains of this world, at the ways that this world falls short of God's vision for the kingdom to come, we are not called to dwell only in those places. We were also meant for joy, meant for pleasure, meant for singing and dancing, for laughing until our cheeks hurt and our sides ache. The scene in today's gospel reminded me of the final scene in the movie Don't Look Up on Netflix. If you haven't seen it yet, again, apologies for spoilers. But long story short, there is a comet heading straight for Earth. They call it a planet killer. And by the end of the movie, all of their attempts to divert it have failed, and the fate of the planet is sealed. But in the face of this cataclysmic event, the behavior of the group of main characters is honestly somewhat surprising, because they don't collapse into inconsolable puddles of tears. They don't wallow in regret. They don't even go out for one last binge of earthly pleasures. They turn off their phones, turn off the TV, and they gather together for a meal. They sit around a table as a family, bound not by blood, but by love. They pray in thanksgiving for all that God has given them. They share the things for which they are grateful. They debate lofty and philosophical concepts like whether homemade apple pie tastes better than store-bought. In the face of the darkness that is to come, their last moments are filled with laughter, joy, and love, not as a denial of the reality of things, nor even as an act of defiance. It was simply a celebration of life in the face of impending death, just like Mary's bold act of anointing Jesus' feet. In the face of all that awaited Jesus in just 6 days' time, he too gathered with his family for a meal. I wonder if there were lively debates about whether the bread that was bought at the marketplace was better than the homemade. I certainly like to think that the room was not filled with anticipatory dread, but rather the sound of laughter and the smell of a precious perfume that was poured out in loving abundance. What would cultivating a theology of holy delight look like in your life? I believe that we are called to bask in the joy for which we were made. We are called to splash around in the grace that God has poured out for us like little kids running through the sprinklers. Let us worship God with every smile that crosses our lips, with every laugh that forms in our throats, and every gift given in love to one another. Let us revel in holy delight. Amen.